Good morning, dear colleagues. We have with us the President of the Government of Spain, Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez, with us today. Can I please ask you to take your seats? Dear Prime Minister, welcome to the European Parliament and thank you for being with us. In times of geopolitical change, we have a joint responsibility to promote social justice, democracy and the rule of law. Citizens look to us to defend European values. Dear Pedro, let me thank your country for its support to Ukraine and to Spain's team for the achievements of the Spanish Presidency of the European Council. With the Artificial Intelligence Act, together we have delivered the world's first set of legislation to manage AI and promote innovation. With the Critical Raw Materials Act, we will secure EU supplies and European sovereignty. With the political deal on an anti-SLAPP directive, we will protect journalists. We are nearing the end of the year, but there is still a lot of work to do, as we've just had the opportunity to talk about. Our focus remains on trying to find a way forward on remaining files, particularly on migration. People expect us to deliver, and we must. So, Prime Minister, the floor is yours.
Presidenta Metsola.
President Metsola, President von der Leyen, Vice President Šefčovič, High Representative Borrell, honourable members. I'd like to start with a brief reference to the date. Normally it's at the beginning of a presidency that the country of the presidency comes to Parliament and talks through the priorities. But bringing forward elections to the 23rd of July 2023 meant that this was not such a suitable approach. So I'm actually before you in the last few days of the presidency, not to talk through what we're planning to do, but to talk about what we have done, what we've achieved, and what remains to be done. I hope it's been worth the wait, and I think it might have been, because in the meantime we've gained a significant ally for the next 4 years with a progressive government in Spain. Spain was faced with a choice, with two different visions of the European construction, the right and far right, to row back on social and environmental progress as achieved in Spain in recent years, applying the failed neoliberal formulae which did so much to worsen the recent financial crisis. The other option was a progressive coalition where, despite having certain differences, we wanted to make progress. We wanted to continue consolidating the European project. We wanted to go for social justice, for labour reform, for respect and democratic cohabitation. The right causes, feminism, green transition, strengthening our common project, which is the European project. Those progressive forces won the elections, fortunately, and formed a new progressive coalition government on the 16th of November, with 179 seats in the Parliament, an absolute majority, the will of the people expressed when over 12 million people participated with groups which are not part of the government, providing support. We will always support the EU, European values and principles, and the leadership which we have shown in the rotating presidency of Council, I think, bears witness to that. And Here we have the second reason why I hope it has been worth the wait. It has been a successful presidency, I hope. I would say that we've had 43 files approved, for instance, more than average. We've achieved significant progress in terms of legislation and policies for the future of Europe. Obviously, time means I can't mention all of them, but I would like to mention a few. We set 4 priorities at the beginning of the presidency when we presented our objectives. Firstly, giving a push to re-industrialisation and achieving open strategic autonomy in the EU. Our citizens have faced a lot of difficulties over the last few years. There's been a shortage of sanitary products, masks. Countries that were worst hit by the effects of the pandemic early on, climate change, economic, social and environmental consequences of that. Putin's war in Ukraine had an impact on energy prices, and there's an economic impact on citizens' pockets. We need to learn from that and improve. The international order has been discussed in this chamber, of course. The international order is changing, and Europe needs to change too. Massive industrial outsourcing to other continents, blind faith in import has to go. We need more domestic production. We need to be competitive in sectors where we're at the vanguard, and we need to be going for the industries of the future so that we have more companies and more quality jobs for our citizens. For that, we need more innovation, industrial policy, and we need to further develop the single market. This doesn't mean that we should be anti-globalization, that we should be protectionist. Some say that, on the far right, for instance. What I'm talking about is strengthening domestic industry, becoming more efficient. This is vital. This is what we need for the future of the European economy. But we'll always be more prosperous if we cooperate with other countries. A few figures that I think are quite eloquent here. If we look at our participation in the global economy, 40% of GDP in Europe depends on that, and 1 in 5 jobs in the EU depends on that. So rather than closing ourselves off in an isolationist way, we need more trade expansion, consolidating, diversifying and enlarging our links with the outside world, modernising multilateral architecture, development aid, commitment to the welfare of other countries, particularly those in the global south. This is the vision for the future which the Spanish presidency has endeavoured to build over these 6 months of presidency. This is a vision which the 27 heads of state and government endorsed at the recent informal council in the Spanish city of Granada, and we very much hope that this new strategic agenda for Europe will be taken forward in the next presidency. Over the course of the presidency, I think the EU has taken many steps forward. The President of the European Parliament has referred to this too. We've had pioneer legislation on supply of critical raw materials, green and digital technology, a pioneering piece of legislation for developing and adopting AI in Europe while respecting our interests and the interests of our citizens. We've also taken decisions to defend the modernisation of agriculture. And here too the European Parliament deserves congratulations for the agreements which we've achieved, and also yesterday's agreement on fisheries that will ensure the future prosperity of thousands of Spanish and European families. We also have new economic security instruments protecting us against coercion from third countries and protecting free movement of goods, services and people at times of crisis within our single market. At the same time, while we were doing all that, we've also taken the external agenda forward. EU CELAC, I think that was a historic meeting with Latin America and the Caribbean, and that trade agreement with Mercosur, with new trade agreements with Chile, New Zealand, with the Organization of African, Latin American and Pacific States is highly significant. This will mean something to the citizens of Europe. This will mean that we have more trade with those countries, and this will help us to diversify our supply chains. The second priority, along with reindustrialization and open strategic autonomy, was to make progress with the green transition and the adoption of measures that would allow us to deal with the effects of the climate emergency. As Europeans, we need to stop climate change and environmental degradation. It's not only about survival, it's also a huge opportunity. If we do it right, if we are resilient and persistent over the next few years, if we don't use crises to postpone our action on the climate emergency, then our action will make us more prosperous and more competitive. We'll be creating new industries. We'll be increasing 1 point of GDP year on year, every year, and over 1 million new jobs only within this decade. This will also help us to drastically reduce our energy dependency, raw materials coming from outside the EU. Just think of how vulnerable Europe is to Putin's Russia, bringing down the electricity bill that our citizens have to pay, making our companies more competitive, and something that people don't mention often enough, and I would like to raise it here, reducing disease. Will be saving over 300,000 lives per year, which are currently lost due to air pollution and adverse climate events. So what I'm saying with all of this is that the green agenda is not what the far right would have. It's not an obstacle to Europe's competitiveness. Actually, it is the great hope for Europe. So I hope that Europe has taken significant steps forward in the Spanish presidency. We've achieved agreements to reduce polluting gases from industry, to make aviation more sustainable. We've approved pioneering regulations that will allow us to reuse waste better and have more sustainable, repairable, recyclable products. And here, too, I would like to thank the European Parliament for its work. We've achieved something which was very important to this presidency, which is the Nature Restoration Bill. This will allow us to recover ecosystems which have been subject to degradation in Europe. We have presented a common front, together with the President of the European Commission, in COP28. And we've heard that at least we'll be transitioning away from fossil fuels, which is an excellent result from Dubai.
Estoy convencido de que
It is my conviction that in the not-too-distant future, the regions with the most growth will be the regions growing in harmony with nature. Thanks to the measures that we are currently adopting, I believe Europe can be at the forefront of that economy which is balanced with nature. Reindustrialization, adaptation, responding to the climate emergency, also social justice and economic justice. In the second half of the 20th century, as a consequence of the Franco dictatorship and the autarky that we suffered for 4 decades in Spain, 2 million Spaniards, including my grandfather and father, emigrated to Europe, looking for jobs, looking for opportunities. Sadly, they didn't have those jobs and opportunities within Spain. They had to face some prejudice. They had to face some rejection. But they also got a welcome. They got a welcome from tolerant people, people who would open up the doors of their houses. They got married to some of these people. They formed truly European families. And it was here in Europe that our parents and grandparents discovered something wonderful, which is that jobs are not just about putting food on the table. It's about dignity in life. And they also discovered that a welfare state system can ensure public health, education, decent pension for people who retire. And when they went back to Spain, once the dictatorship was over, those migrants brought back with them that progress, and they brought back with them some aspiration. They voted, they took part in trades unions, they were active in business. They worked for the Spanish economy to be something more than prosperous, for it to be fair as well. And we govern in Spain with those values. We want that reality to continue. And the reason I say that is that Europe needs more competitiveness. Yes, we need to increase our productivity to continue growing. We also need to ensure that opportunities and wealth which is generated gets through to everyone, to all transitions, and that the cost of the green and digital transitions are not creating a bill which is footed by the most vulnerable in society. And I think we've achieved significant progress in this presidency. We have reached a majority of member states and social representatives at the tripartite social summit with the Council rotating Presidency, Commission and Parliament in October in Brussels, and I believe that we're on the verge of achieving something very important, which is a historic reform of the electricity market. This will allow not only a boost to renewables, but it will bring down electricity bills. It will make them more stable. It will make the system more transparent, which means more information to consumers, to fellow citizens, and it will protect citizens against abuse by energy multinationals. We've also approved various measures that will strengthen consumer rights, that will also improve the labour rights of millions of workers. We've also achieved significant progress in other areas, not just in the social pillar, but the disability card, new measures to combat structural violence in all European societies, violence against women as a form of structural violence, trafficking in human beings, increasing the rights of other vulnerable communities. Now we just have the midterm review of the MFF to deal with, and of course that will be on the agenda this week and indeed tomorrow, and the reform of fiscal rules. We very much hope that there will be an agreement before the end of the year on that, which will allow us to keep to balance the books for public accounts and also meet member states' obligations to security and defence, digital and green transitions, social benefits, and everything else which citizens rightfully expect. So I very much hope that that will be achieved by the end of the month. Our fourth priority was strengthening European unity. Over the last few years, as you all know very well, Europe has been suffering tensions and attacks. There are those who wish to divide us, but they failed. They didn't succeed. Actually, we are more cohesive and stronger than ever. Nobody's celebrating Brexit. Nobody wants to leave the EU anymore, except for a few people on the very far right. Nobody's talking about leaving the EU anymore. Nobody's saying we should have looser links between member states. Citizens now support the European project more than ever, partly because of our response to the pandemic, and this is true across the territory of Europe. I think we've learnt a very important lesson, honourable members. It's a world of giants, and in order to prosper, you need to come together. You need to integrate internally. You need to coordinate when you're faced with external challenges. And for that reason, as the President of the European Parliament said earlier, we need to celebrate the achievements, the Asylum and Migration Pact, for instance, and I undertake to work on a pact which is good for Europe and for all of our societies over the next few weeks. This will allow us to better manage migration, irregular migration, and to strengthen the external dimension of cooperation with transit countries and countries of origin. And logically, too, of course, we will be calling for an orderly migration policy with coordination across member states. Parliamentary agreement on treaty reform, significant achievements on enlargement, with a significant landmark in Grenada that will hopefully be validated at the European Council tomorrow. The time has now come for the EU to open its doors and welcome in Ukraine and Moldova and the Western Balkan countries. We should also consolidate our European political community. Over 40 heads of state and government came to Grenada. We've seen unanimous, cohesive support for Ukraine in its striving for freedom and EU membership. I just want to tell you a quick story. I started the Spanish presidency with a trip here in July, and I hope to end the presidency with the launching of the accession talks.
Pero sobre todo lo que esperamos todos.
But what we all hope for, and I include myself here, is that we'll come back here very soon to celebrate the withdrawal of Russian troops and a long-lasting, fair peace in that country which is fighting so hard for its own freedom and for ours.
Quiero decir que esa claridad,
clarity and unity, that's what characterises our response to Russia's unjustified aggression. And that has stopped crime. It has saved lives. When Europe is clear and united, it can do that. So looking at what happened yesterday at the General Assembly of the UN in New York, we need to speak with the same clarity and unity about what is happening in Israel and Palestine. If we want the world to respect us as an actor on the geopolitical stage, as a credible and relevant body, if we want the people of Europe to be proud of us and see that European values are not just words, we need to speak out loud and clear with one voice. We need to condemn terrorist atrocities committed by Hamas. We need to call for unconditional immediate release of all hostages taken by Hamas. We need to support combating terrorism in the Middle East. And we need to recognise Israel's right to defend itself and to exist without any doubt whatsoever, but with the same conviction and the same values. We need to say enough, enough death of innocent civilians in Gaza, including thousands of children.
Los bombardeos.
Bombing must stop immediately. We need a humanitarian ceasefire. Humanitarian aid is urgently needed in sufficient quantity for people who are suffering from hunger, thirst and cold. International humanitarian law needs to be respected, and we need to play an active role in contributing to a definitive, integral solution to this conflict, to give a prospect for credible, serious peace, to give form to the two-state solution. The European Parliament has recognised that the state of Palestine needs to live in peace and security alongside the state of Israel.
Y en ese tema, como el de Ucrania,
for this, as for Ukraine, Europe needs unity, and over the next few months, Spain will do whatever it can to forge that unity. Unity in diversity and unity in adversity. I think those need to be our slogans in the EU in these very complex times. President, honourable members, I'd like to conclude with some thoughts about the future and ourselves. Here in this chamber, there are political forces who do not believe in the EU. They think Europe is a decadent, spoilt society that we're trying to achieve a green transition and social equality or welfare that we cannot afford. Such people will repudiate the achievements of the last few decades. They're afraid of the future. They hark back to a glorious past which actually never existed and is therefore impossible to go back to. I don't share that pessimism. I do not share that reactionary mindset. Yes, of course, there are things that can be improved. There are things which aren't working. But this should never make us forget that despite it all, Europe makes progress. Europe is progressing. It has never stopped since the Second World War. And there is no empirical evidence to indicate that we will cease to do this in future. Europe has all the necessary ingredients to continue being what it is today, one of the most prosperous, socially advanced regions on the planet. Honourable members, we constitute half of global investment in well-being. We are world leaders in trade. We receive foreign direct investment. We're number 2 in terms of innovation ecosystem. We have the talent, we have the business, we have the public institutions which are necessary to be at the forefront of the green transition and to develop the industry of the future. And that's not an opinion, that is borne out by the facts. There's evidence. Now, we should not be complacent. We cannot rest on our laurels. We need to be active. There are a lot of problems that need to be solved, and there are a lot of injustices that need to be corrected. But I say this because we do need to constantly bear in mind our huge potential. It is possible to build a Europe with clean, cheap energy, with full employment, with decent wages, with decent public services, and with a better standard of living for social improvement of all citizens. The time has come to look to the future with more ambition and with more optimism, because the EU is facing a challenge now which is not about avoiding decline. It's not about the development of other regions around the world. We need to be at the forefront of a new era of global prosperity. Honourable members, it is my firm conviction that we can achieve that. I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Prime Minister Sánchez, I now give the floor to the President of the Commission.